Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Please find a seat. My name is Peter Wanders. I'm the president here at Anderson Ranch. So on behalf of all of our staff, our trustees, many of National Council in this room help make the ranch possible. Thank you all for coming. We are thrilled to have you here. Anderson Ranch is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. So 60 years, we can clap for that. 60 years of art making, 60 years of what happens in those studios. It's just really a magic, transformative thing that can happen with art and what art is in our lives and what art nurtures in us and what art helps us understand about the world. It's just so crucial to making a better world. So thank you all for being here and being a part of that. What really has made this magic for 60 years isn't only what happens in those studios with those instructors, with those faculties, with those artists. It's the community and the conversations that come out of that really make it an amazing, special place. So extremely excited to welcome everyone to campus, this beautiful place. And really this dialogue program continues and enhances that idea of conversation. Liz Farrell, our Senior Director of Artistic Programs, leads the dialogue program. So we're thrilled to have her moderating our conversation today. Really want to celebrate what a beautiful campus this is and acknowledge that this is while the ranch is celebrating 60 years, for 600 years, the Ute Indian tribe took care of these lands as their ancestral properties. They're still active in this valley, and we really want to acknowledge and celebrate what an incredibly beautiful place this is, and that their heritage, their spirits, and their presence still exist here in this valley. Want to really thank Rachel Scheckman, who collaborated with Liz in putting this program together. She gets a round of applause. We're going to give her parents a round of applause for creating Rachel Scheckman, so we get a double clap. Want to thank Michelle Griffith here for helping support this program on and on. She gets a clap. She's helped support and grow this program, and she recently created an endowment to help make sure this is a perpetual program, and we really appreciate that leadership. And if anyone else would like to help establish and support those programs under that leadership, we'd love to chat with you. We'll get on to our program today. I'm going to pass to Liz to introduce the whole group. But we have Alexandra Cunningham Cameron here joining us for the conversation. Kelsey, Keith, and Nifemi Marcus-Bello are all going to be on stage here with us. We're going to have about a 2-hour conversation. There'll be a little break in the middle. There'll be a book signing at the end with Nifemi, so we're excited about that. We encourage you to stay and have lunch in the cafe, continue the conversation together, sit at the community tables with the workshop students. We also encourage you to wander campus, go in and out of the studio, see what's going on here. It's a really magical place. So Liz, thank you for putting this program together. Again, thank you, Rachel, for helping collaborate with that. And I'm going to pass to you for the day. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Peter. So hi, everybody. Thank you for being here for this exciting conversation. We've been planning this for a while. We're so thankful to have our panelists here. And I'm going to start with a little bit of background. So Alexandra Cunningham Cameron is a curator, editor, and strategist whose work explores the intersecting fields of design, art, fashion, and media. She's the director of design at the Judd Foundation. Kelsey Keith is currently creative director at Miller Knoll and author of a design newsletter called Ground Condition. She initially joined Herman Miller in 2021 after a dozen years leading design and architecture-focused editorial outlets. Nifemi Marcus-Bello is a Lagos-based designer whose practice bridges commercial and artistic disciplines. His work and design contributions are held in the collections of major institutions, including MoMA, the Brooklyn Museum, LACMA, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Design Museum London, among others. Nifemi is the recipient of several international honors, including a special mention in the Lowell Craft Prize, the Hublot Design Prize, Monocle's Emerging Designer Award, and he was shortlisted for the Wallpaper Designer of the Year Award. So it's very exciting to have the three of you here and the opportunity to hear all of your perspectives on contemporary design. We're going to hear from all of the panelists today to get a little bit of background and set the stage for our conversation. And let's start with you, Nifemi. What we're going to do is have you give us just a little bit of background. Kevin, if you could, thank you. A little bit of background on who you are and And uh, we really are excited to kind of hear a little bit more. I'm going to pass you the clicker. We want to take a look at your work and explore the trajectory of your practice. So take it away.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Nifemi, but everyone can call me Nif. I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, so the western part of Africa. But I've had the opportunity to actually live in various countries, and I think a lot of my practice is influenced by the countries I've lived in, but also the countries my parents have lived in as well. So I was raised by an architect father who went to Politecnico in Milan, who speaks way more Italian than English. And my mom, who's a lawyer, was or is an art collector. She doesn't collect as much anymore, but she collects West African art. So growing up around all of these, I would say, influences, I think kind of shaped my thinking. So from a very young age, I started making with my hands. And at the age of 13, my mom actually shoved me into a welding apprenticeship in Lagos. And I started failing in school and doing more work around design and making, and then eventually found myself going to university in the north of England in Leeds. And I think Leeds also influenced my thinking as a designer because it's a very industrial city in Yorkshire and the north of England. And the university I went to was actually in the School of Mechanical Engineering, so there was very little artistic practice. It was mostly more around mass production and I would say working with industry. Okay. So this is just a random page to kind of show you what look and feel of the kind of objects that I've designed. These are mostly commercial work. So within my studio, which I kind of established in 2017, I would say kind of because before then I already started doing work, freelancing. And the first thing that launched my studio was actually mostly commercial work. So I would always pitch myself to clients and ask people if they needed design work, and then I would design furniture for them, and then kind of self-produce or find collaborators to produce with. So with the commercial side, I work with, depending on what the brief is, I work with different type of materials. So it can be wood, metal, stone, marble, etc. So this is one of the first objects I actually designed, and I would say kicked off the studio. And it was actually a pleasant mistake, because when I designed this object, I was still working for a mobile phone company, so I was designing affordable smartphones for the African continent specifically. But during my downtime, I would go into factories and knock on doors and try to pitch, I would say, designs, so to speak, and I got shot down a lot of times, and then realized very quickly that actually, because I know as designers, sometimes we do have bigger egos, big egos. So I had to kind of get rid of that ego and do a lot of unlearning, but also understand the cultural context in which I was designing in Nigeria. So what I did was I would go into factories and just have conversations and do walkthroughs. And eventually what I started doing was designing around assembly lines and not changing the assembly lines at all, and letting the assembly lines dictate the output. So this is actually still produced by a generator manufacturer, which is one of the factories that I approached in Lagos. They had never done anything like this before. They usually never do furniture. They only do consumer electronics or generator casing objects. And this, I would say, did pretty well. We sold a lot more than I anticipated, to be honest, because I thought who would want this in their house after it was designed. But we sold a lot more. I think selling a lot in New York and London specifically. I think about 500 stools have been sold so far. This was just a really interesting project that I worked on last year. It was for a show in Paris. And it's actually a shelf that I had designed, but I had this idea of like figuring out how to iterate objects that I've probably designed in the past to see how I can introduce new functionality and technology to it. So this shelf, I actually worked with a French company called Le Boit Concept that actually work on building speakers, bespoke speakers, and we kind of worked on a listening room in Paris during Art Week. This is another commercial work that I had done. This is a flat pack marble table for CB2. Never heard of CB2 before, but they approached me like 2 years ago. No, actually 4 years ago, and the table was launched 2 years ago. And it does pretty well as well. So that's the commercial side, and I know I only have 20 minutes, so I'm gonna pace myself real quick. But I wanna dive into the artistic practice that I started because I had a lot of questions as a designer and wanted to figure out a way to pose these questions through creating objects that I can create dialogue and spark dialogue with myself and even colleagues, especially across the continent of Africa. And one of the subject matters that I always happened to stumble upon was metal in general, because of course being a welder and welding being my background from a young age, I wanted to work with metal and understand how the material in itself is impacting the society that I live in. So I wanted to look at metal from the past, present, and future. So I looked at this through, I would say, different spaces across Lagos. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Benin bronze casters in Nigeria, but basically they're prestigious casters who were actually formed pre-colonial times through the Benin royal family and kind of engage with the royal family to create head busts and works for the royal family. So to work with them takes a lot of conversation, a lot of convincing, and they kind of have to respect your own artistry to be able to even give you the benefits of the doubt to actually work with them. So that was me looking at the past. And then the present, aluminium, the idea to kind of use aluminium and spark that dialogue of thinking of what the present day Nigerian material is actually happened because I'll keep the story short, but then I'll expand more next slides. But actually happened because of a second-hand car that I bought from America and shipped to Lagos. Fun story. And then extraction, again, from where I've lived. I lived in Zambia, and it's part of the Copper Belt. Lusaka is part of the Copper Belt on the continent, and there's a lot of extraction that happens within Lusaka with copper, and then it's been sent abroad, refined, and then sold back to Zambians who can't really afford it. So I kind of spoke around that with the work that I'm doing. So as I mentioned, oops, 1 second. Yeah. So as I mentioned, Act 1, Friction Ridge, actually working with the bronze casters in Benin was actually a learning experience for me, and I think it was also knowledge exchange because most of the times they always do the same objects over and over again. And then they always have to sometimes get permission from the royal family to be able to work with artists to create a commission. So this was heavily collaborative. But one of the first things that I had to do was actually create a mold for the object that I wanted to design. So the mold was actually made in my studio with silicone and plaster of Paris, POP, that you can see on the exterior. And then these are some of the molds in the studio as well. This is the bench being assembled in Benin, but also some tests, as you can see on the left. Actually, I should say that the reason why the bench is called Friction Ridge is because the etching that you see on the body is actually the fingerprints of myself, the artisans that worked on it, and then some of my assistants at the studio as well.
So seeing that repeated over and over, what was that like for you as working with molds?
It felt therapeutic. It felt really therapeutic for sure. It's something that I'd do again, but I don't know if I have the time. But I'd do it again, maybe in retirement. So we made 10 of the benches, and then eventually showed it at Marta in LA, which was really well received. And then I think the first acquisition for my practice was from this work, I think, with the Chicago Art Institute, or the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm going to try and run through these really quickly.
Take your time.
So Act 2. So there's a place in Lagos called Owode Oniri. It's a scrapyard, but a lot of the times, secondhand goods are extremely prominent within that scrapyard. And the secondhand goods actually come from North America. And it's always broken down into parts and then melted down for reuse. So in some aspects, of course, aluminum being one of the prominent materials that you can actually easily just melt down and reuse. Aluminum,
and it's also lighter weight, correct?
Exactly, lighter weight. So aluminum became really prominent in Lagos, and people ended up starting interacting with it. So I still feel like it's the material of the future, even though, of the present, sorry. Even though I know that aluminum sometimes in some aspects or society has had its day. So this was the second-hand car that I bought with my first paycheck. I shipped it, I think, from New York to Lagos. It cost the same amount that I paid for the car to ship it to Lagos. So I ended up being flat broke. And had to reach out to my cousin and ask him, tell him that I needed to repair the car myself, and also maybe interact with certain mechanics. So he told me about this suburb here, which is the suburb I was talking about, Owode Oniri, which is like this massive scrapyard where a lot of working class people have, I would say, mechanical craft of some sorts, because they also recycle some parts of the cars and then recast them for reuse. So I thought it was really interesting. I wanted to document this, but then interacting with the community and the people there, they're like, yo, there has to be some sort of exchange, and I think monetary exchange of some sorts. So what I ended up doing was I decided to kind of collaborate with them to create a series which I call Tales by Moonlight. As you can see, these are some of the parts that were melted to make the objects. Some of the process. The one in the middle is quite interesting because when we were producing these, it was raining season, and right now, actually, Lagos is slightly flooded. And when it rains, it's like really tropical rain and like lightning, thunder, everything. And I was impatient, so I decided, I was like, you know what, let's get some kerosene and like burn the mold so that it dries up really quickly, and we can cast. So that's what the image in the middle is.
It's a beautiful image for documentation. It's quite mysterious. Maybe a little bit more just about this process right here.
So this is a sand casting process. So what we do is basically we create masters and then make the mold out of the sand.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
1 second. So this was the final output. This was showcased with Marta at Design Miami. It was so well received, but I didn't expect it to be as well received as it was. I mean, I think Benjamin would say the same as well, because I will go into how well received it's been, but a lot of really good conversations, a lot of partnerships and discussions have gone through just because of this showcase, and especially one object in particular. And this is it.
And its reception being so positive, I'm sure that changes your career a bit, and perhaps your approach to making, has that impacted that going forward? How does that affect an artist?
I don't think it changed anything, because I mean, with Act 3, which I'll show right after this, I just basically posed a different question, but with the same approach that I did even with Act 1. And I think the reason why I was scared is because I had never been to Design Miami, and I know that a lot of Design Miami can be polished and clean and refined.
Not gritty, yeah.
Exactly, refined. And I've always wanted to make stuff that felt tactile, that feels like human, and things people could actually interact with and feel like, okay, someone made this and spent their time making it.
Well, it sounds like your audience is ready for that as well.
Yeah.
Wanting to see that.
Exactly.
Tactility.
So even with this piece, I won't lie to you by saying, no, I had this amazing epiphany and direction to designing this. I just felt like I wanted to spark something and create an object that felt like I hadn't seen before, but also taking into consideration the theme of Tales by Moonlight, because Tales by Moonlight, sorry, something that I forgot to mention is Tales by Moonlight was a TV show that I grew up watching in Lagos, Nigeria, where an older woman would sit under the moonlight and have kids around her, and she's telling them folk tales. So that's why the seating typology, and that's why the bowl for offering, etc., and the setup. So I wanted to kind of pay homage to that with this form, and that's how this kind of form kind of came about. And the reason why I highlight this piece was because I think right after, in like under a year, I only made 5 editions, and they all were acquired by museums in the United States, so 5 different museums.
Fantastic, congratulations.
Thanks. And then it also got a special mention at the Loewe Craft Prize and toured like Japan for like a year with Loewe.
Can I also,
So-
I'll jump in too to say that you're really describing a lot of like relying on intuition, tactility, perhaps even experimentation. And when you're producing something or mass producing something, I'm guessing that or maybe it's not considered mass production, but multiplicity. It seems like you just jump right in. I think a lot of artists might be a little bit stuck or a little bit hesitant to be so experimental.
I mean, it helps that my background is in like mass production, because again, I studied industrial design for like years and also worked as an industrial designer. So I'm never scared of like multiplicity. I think I actually feel a lot better when I know that I can make an addition of something. Yeah. So with Act 3, Whispers of a Trail, again, living in Zambia, being part of the Copper Belt, a lot of extraction happens there with very little refinement on the continent. And I wanted to spark a dialogue around that, because I strongly believe that the future of Africa, especially from a social economical aspect, is refinement of raw materials. And I can give examples. For example, cocoa, which is gotten from some parts of Western Nigeria, is actually extracted and refined in Rotterdam and then sent back to Nigeria to be made as chocolate. And in some aspects, a lot of Nigerians then can't even afford chocolate. And then with oil, we only just started refining our oil. We've always had oil. It's been extracted and then sent out and then sent back to us, sold as a commodity. So I wanted to create objects to kind of spark that dialogue. And I stumbled onto copper, of course, being a metal, and a precious metal at that, in anywhere in the world that you can see fit. So.
And that connects back to also the car and the cost of shipping, and thinking about how that sometimes is even more arduous than producing the work.
Exactly. Exactly. With that, I had to work with a lot of copper, and this became really tricky. I went into, like I usually do, into various spaces in Lagos and started having conversations around copper, and I stumbled onto a guy who I thought would be able to sell me copper. I only thought I ended up making a copper alloy, so it was copper and bronze, and I thought I only would need maybe, I think, 200 kg or something, or 3. We ended up using like close to a ton of metal to create the collection. And when I started, he kept telling me that he wouldn't even sell me the copper because he wouldn't make as much money. That even though the copper is recycled, he has clients that would buy it from Canada for double the price. And I was like, that's weird and random. Like, you don't want to
Well,
sell locally.
It's interesting how copper has become so valuable.
Yeah.
And as a printmaker, we use copper plates a lot.
Yeah.
And in art school, we would go sell our plates when we were done using them just to make money. So
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. That's
Yeah.
really interesting as a challenge for
Yeah, so
choosing
it was an extreme challenge. So which is why I called the collection Whispers of a Trail, because I ended up having to like engage with 3 or 4 people
Yeah.
and go on this trail to like get as much copper as possible. And with that in mind, that's what kind of informed the typology of the nomadic feel. So you'll see with this, you'll see the headrest, which is inspired by, oops, 1 second, which is inspired by the nomadic African headrest. It was interesting because when I was working on this, actually, I went to the Jod house and I saw this exact one from Ethiopia right next to his bed.
And was it wood or was it
It was
stone?
wood.
Yeah,
It was
I
wood.
believe so.
Yeah, I saw
Okay.
it right next to his bed. And I think it's one of those typologies that I find really interesting because the headrest is quite, it's comfortable, but it's also the function, and the reason for it is because the nomadic farmers in West Africa would always walk from farm to farm giving services and have it tied around their waist, but then they'll place it on the ground where they have to sleep to elevate their heads from the ground so that insects aren't able to like get into their ears or etc. So I wanted to look at this from a contemporary standpoint because I was working with copper. The idea was to kind of make this make the piece out of copper as well. This is extremely comfortable. I'm just saying. Yeah. It is. I should have put. I should have. You know, it's funny. We had a picture because we had Eames try it at the gallery, and he really liked it. And we had a whole conversation around this, around the headrest.
Well, I'll also say that I've noticed that they have been developing pillows. Although they're soft, they're with that design and that shape for neck discomfort.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's interesting. I think there's some other mass
Yeah,
production. going
yeah,
on,
yeah. And then keeping to the theme of like trails. So that's why I designed the lamp, because with a trail you always need light. And I wanted to have a conversation with like modern and old age. Excuse me. So that's why the candle and the LED light bulb, kind of having that conversation with both of the pieces. This is also an interesting piece that's catching on. It's currently showing at the Dries van Noten Foundation. And it's one of those pieces that I was also really skeptical about because it was tough from a technical standpoint. The base in itself is one piece, and then the tops are welded onto the piece. This is it all together. I'm sorry, I think I'm running, so I'm just gonna move really quickly. And then I think in November, for the first time, we had, like I said, it's comfortable. This is proof. Yeah, this is proof. We had a showing in Lagos. And then, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to pass to Kelsey.
Hi. Hopefully you can hear. Let's see. So I'm going to start by saying I think a question I get a lot is, what does a creative director do? Fair question. It's pretty nebulous. I think that it completely varies depending on where you work and who you're working with. But I guess how I would define it for myself and the job that I currently have as creative director of Miller Knoll, which is the enterprise level of Herman Miller, Knoll, and 14 other design brands that's under that umbrella, is I think a creative director is really responsible for bringing a point of view, a creative point of view to someone that they're working with. And in this case, Miller Knoll was formed when Herman Miller purchased Knoll and its subsidiaries in 2021. And so there was really no point of view. That's just like a corporate merger, right? But the responsibility that we felt, and I feel now, is that we are responsible for 14 of these design companies that have a really, really immense legacy in the design world. I think even if you're just looking at Herman Miller and Knoll, between the two of them, if you come to our archives in Michigan, you were looking at essentially, the history of American design just between those two. It's kind of remarkable. So for Miller Knoll, it was kind of an interesting challenge to think about what that means out in the world. I had come from Herman Miller, where I had worked for 4 years developing that brand and identity and voice in the world. And obviously, that was quite a different challenge because Herman Miller had already existed for 100 years and had lots of amazing talents working for it. So, in that case, you're really taking the values that had been set forth over time that were very consistent and consistently expressed, but taking the values and then trying to translate them in a different way for a contemporary audience. Otherwise, you run the risk of repeating yourself or just seeming like locked in the mid-century, which obviously I would not want to do, even with great respect for what came before. I'd say every project kind of starts in this research phase. My background is in art history and architectural history, and then I was a journalist. I worked in magazines and in digital media for a dozen years before coming to Herman Miller. And so when I do research and my team does research, it's both visual and like all of the word stuff. So, you can see like this is just a very small selection of images from a project where we were doing some research for conferences to develop a visual identity for Miller Knoll conferences. You can see bottom left here some IDCA material, International Design Conference of Aspen, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. Those archives are held at the Getty. And so we did a design research project and went to the Getty, to those archives, to look at all that material for about 4 decades. That was amazing.
What a big project.
Yeah, I mean, that was just kind of for fun, but has ended up informing. I mean, sometimes you take on these things because you know it will be interesting later. And I'd say that that's a big part of the job, is sort of just having this like visual Rolodex, as well as like a sort of mental, I mean, that's the art history stuff. You just it's drilled into you to memorize dates and facts from decades. Okay, so I think when I was thinking about how to define what I do as creative director, loosely speaking, it can be boiled down to a few things, which are brand identity, photography, publications, exhibitions, brand collaborations, and partnerships. So starting with brand identity, this is a project that I did for Herman Miller that debuted at the very beginning of 2024. Herman Miller had not revisited its brand identity or design system in about 25 years. The last time it had been touched was in the 90s. Oh, wow. And so this project took about 18 months to do. And then we debuted it in 2024, and you can sort of see all the ways in which you can interact with that now, and it's been fun to see it continue to develop over time, but yeah.
And Kelsey, can you explain a little bit more about brand identity and what that means for a company like Miller Knoll?
Sure.
Point of view you mentioned, but just expand a little bit.
So I mean, brand identity is, it's most basic. You have like the logo mark and literally the identity, so like the visual of how it shows up in the world, starting with the logo. But it really is much more than that. It's how the look and feel, how people, I think what people are getting a sense of out of that entity as they interact with it in all of these spaces and places. I feel very lucky to work for a company that really prizes the in-person experience. That's a huge part of Herman Miller and also Miller Knoll. And also how I've really approached it. That's what I favor most. I think, digital is obviously very present in all of our lives, but I think the things that really stick with people are the in-person experiences. Thank you all for being here today, by the way.
Thank you for that breakdown.
So, and I guess when you're doing developing brand work, again, it's quite different for a Herman Miller, where you're working with 100 years of history, and you have this really rich archive of things that you know. You know, I think a lot of us may have an idea of Herman Miller, like the innovations, you know, that were brought forth by the Eames office, the Aeron chair. There's a lot of like product innovation there that is really looms large, even in our culture. But from a design perspective, there's a lot of interesting things to mine as well. For example, the designer John Massey, who also worked with the Container Corporation of America and did some things for the International Design Conference. He is the one who he brought in Helvetica to Herman Miller in 1968 and did this whole corporate identity that was like very rigorous in one regard, but also like totally freewheeling in 60s in another regard. It was like putting all of these, like getting rid of title case, basically. They were just all lowercase for all of these corporate communications and these like insane color palettes. And so when I brought in this design agency called Order in New York to work with us on this, those were some of the things we were looking at. And again, it's like looking at the past, taking the values that people were representing, and then kind of rethinking about it and recontextualizing it for the time. For Miller Knoll, it's been quite a bit different, obviously. Miller Knoll it's many things, but it is also like very corporate, and so I think like in some sense the brand identity itself is more of a vessel and needs to be pretty straight-laced. But let's see. Oh, here's another fun thing that I did for Herman Miller once the brand identity was done. We released a magazine called Ideas. And obviously, it's a lot of fun to apply that design system to a printed publication because you can do fun stuff like that.
Incredibly visually compelling, and I know that's the point, but really beautiful.
And for someone like me, I mean, magazines are very familiar, beloved territory, so that's always fun to have an excuse to do them. So for Miller Knoll, the corporate identity itself is, I mean, I had some work to do when I came in because it had been kind of all over the place. No one had really done anything with it for 4 years, so it was a mess, frankly. But we really like restrained it, made it much more subtle, and the idea was that it could hold a lot of things. It could hold the brand identities and let those come forth. And where the expression comes from for Miller Knoll is really in the development of the photography. And so this is one example. This is a project I commissioned last fall. A photographer named Balaj Gardi, who is an editorial documentary photographer. He's worked for everyone from NASA to National Geographic. And I took him out to 6 of our manufacturing facilities, domestically and internationally. And we photographed the people who work there, the places that they're located in, to really dimensionalize all of those people and places that Miller Knoll exists in the world.
What a beautiful project. And did you go to all the locations with the artist?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It sounds like a huge project.
Well, I mean, that was very intentional. A lot of people don't get the opportunity to go to a factory where furniture is being produced. I mean, and you all have, and you especially, but like it's a very technical production, but I think for a lot of people, myself included, it actually evokes a pretty emotional response because it really means something when you see something being made and when you see people who are involved in the production of these things. It's not just like seeing a manufactured good at the end of its life cycle in the way that a lot of us interact with things that like seem almost disposable. It's very different when you're seeing something like at the fidelity, especially that like Herman Miller or whoever is making them, where there are craftspeople who are working on sewing the leather pieces for an Eames lounge chair, and they've been doing the same thing for 50 years, but they can whip those things out like nobody's business. And I mean, it is like just insane, their level of tradecraft. So to see that in combination with this very dialed in like manufacturing process is, I mean, it's pretty amazing. So, I mean, you're not getting that here with the sheep, but they're nice too.
Definitely a good point, and I think process and even labor is such a big part of
Yeah.
the end result.
Yeah. So for Miller Knoll, really, I'd say the way the brand comes most to life is through environments and experiences. And so something that's been a big part of my work for the last year or so is working with our architecture and environments team on really making all of those environments like feel like something and feel connected. And so this is recent photography from some of those spaces, including some of that brand identity work. The logo, for example, it's maybe this is not interesting, but it's a more like tone-on-tone approach so that it's just much more subtle. Like I think how I approach Miller Knoll is that as a corporate entity, it doesn't really need to be talking about itself so much. The idea really is to support everything that everyone else is doing, whether it's a brand, whether it's designers, through our exhibitions program, through our foundation where we're supporting different initiatives. So I think
like it's more humble in a
well,
way. Or
I mean, we just don't need to be in front. It's not a consumer brand, so it doesn't need to be screaming at people about the brand, and hence that kind of approach. Photography. This also was a big part of Herman Miller and bringing Herman Miller to life. I'm switching around a bit here. I don't work on products so much now with Miller Knoll, but for Herman Miller, this was a big aspect of it. This project actually blended together a lot of aspects of creative direction because this was a project that I initiated with the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe. Yep. And I worked with the Eames office and Gerard Studios, so all of the descendants of Eames and Gerard, to introduce 2 special edition products which are featured in the bottom left there. The kind of genesis of this story was that Alexandra Gerard was really good friends with Georgia O'Keeffe, and so there was a lot of interesting stuff in her archives that had never been pulled out. So I did a visit to the archives. We photographed the product in her house in Abiquiu, New Mexico. So art directed this whole thing. That was
and that is
pretty
also
insane.
Such a destination for so many artists and so many designers. So yeah.
I mean, getting to actually shoot in that house was it was a spiritual experience for sure.
I'm sure.
I mean, I cried, I'm not gonna lie. And then, so again, the creative direction is kind of like all facets. So it was like product, it was when we had an event to introduce all of this at NYC by Design in May of 2025, there was an event in the Herman Miller store, and so it was bringing some of the motifs, the snake motif, which was the Gerard pattern that was shown in George's house. We did these botanical dyed bandanas that we gave away. There was stuff in the store.
People were fighting over the bandanas.
I bet they were. I would be. Those are gorgeous.
So it's so fun because you really, it's kind of the possibilities are limitless for what you can do if you just have a great imagination and you are determined to make all of these things happen at one time. One more product thing for Herman Miller. I live in Berkeley, which is a bit unusual for Herman Miller, given that it's based in Michigan and creative headquarters are in New York. But due to my proximity and friendship with the people at Heath Ceramics, I put together a limited edition project collaboration with Heath, which came out last holiday season, so in 2025. And so that included, I think it was 7 different silhouettes in 9 colors, 9 glazes that we did. And then it also entailed hiring photographers to do a still life campaign. Nicole Harriet, if anyone knows her work, she's amazing. This is like all her. And that was probably one of the highlights of my career, because I love Heath, and it was super fun to work in this way, where it felt like really true to both brands. There's not a ton of people or a ton of companies that Herman Miller would make sense for us to collaborate with because it's unique. But Heath shares a lot of DNA, and I think the approach to design is very similar, even though the actual product is different. Yeah. And this is interesting. I mean, Herman Miller doesn't usually, sell dishes.
Exactly.
But we happen to be introducing a table collection with a Norwegian designer named Stina Aus. And I think the reason that I was able to get this through early on was that I was like, well, if we're introducing a table collection, how are we going to merchandise that in the stores? We don't have anything to put on it. So here we go.
Very smart.
Yeah. Okay. So now a big part of my work at Miller Knoll, as I said, is, it's a bit more nebulous. There's less product focus. But the things that I'm focused on for the company is kind of operating at a more cultural level. And again, it's not really talking about Miller Knoll so much, but it is really being a platform for other design that connects with us through values. And so part of that is this exhibitions program that I've introduced that we have built gallery space in Michigan, New York, Chicago, and coming soon in Mexico City. And so organizing exhibitions for all of those. Oh, London also. And so these are two examples, recent shows from our silo space in Michigan, which is adjacent to our archives space, which is also amazing. If anyone is traveling through Michigan, please let me know. Would love for you to visit. It's really, really an amazing experience. And so these are shows that were organized by, on the left, the designer Keiji Takuchi, a group show of walking sticks. And then on the right, this was organized by Leon Ransmeyer, who's now the head of industrial design at Cranbrook. And this studio was in partnership with Fabian Capello. They took the students to Guadalajara to do this galvanized steel.
And so the Mexico City gallery is to be...
It's in a new showroom that's opening in October.
Excellent.
Yes.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. Just a couple more exhibitions here. This is in New York now. This is about the sort of overlapping career and enduring influence of the two designers, Ward Bennett and Joe Durso, which was really, this is something I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and this has been well received. But and then this just opened a couple of weeks ago in Chicago. This is a photography exhibition that I curated from that body of work that we were talking about earlier. So I was noting how what we wanted to capture in all of those manufacturing facilities were the people who were doing the work and the places in which we operate them. And so the focus of this entire exhibition was on the people. So what you're seeing is these portraits that were printed 47 inches high. I mean, they're really immense. And then I worked with an architecture firm, Ultramoderne, out of Berkeley, and they designed the exhibition, including the substructure, which is these honeycomb aluminum panels.
Where is the exhibition? Chicago.
It's in Fulton Market. Yes, it's in our showroom, but it's on the ground floor, and it will be open for the next 6 months, I think. So please, would love for you to stop by. That's a fun one to see. Okay, so changing tack a little bit, something that I have done kind of on the side, I also do some publishing stuff with Phaidon for Miller Knoll and manage that relationship, but that's sort of born out of the fact that I have already worked on some books with Phaidon, including the Hay book, which I wrote a few years ago. I've also worked on a book with A24. This one accompanied the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. This was one of the craziest stories I've ever written. I interviewed a quilting circle in Alabama about the multiverse. It was mind-blowing. And then this brings me to this book, which I did for Phaidon, called Design for Life. And this book was a very good entry point into me getting to know Nifemi and his amazing work. And so this was really a real highlight, for sure. I think this, sort of how I framed actually setting up this, going back and reading it was really interesting because the introduction that I wrote is actually touching on so many of the things that we wanted to talk about today and that you've already brought up, actually, which is the interplay between design work, art, editions, and mass production, and like, what are the boundaries between them? Does it need a definition? I mean, these lines have been blurred for so long, and this is actually just, it was funny to go back and look at this because I think I wrote it, I don't know, 3 years ago or something, but. And so Nifemi's already spoken about this bench from his first series, but I saw this in person for the first time at MARTA in LA, and Benjamin Critton, co-founder of MARTA, is here today with us. But to see it in person, obviously, is so much more powerful even than photos, but hopefully you can get a sense of that materiality and strength of the piece from it here. And then, you know, Nifemi spoke to this already about this show at Design Miami, but the reason that I have it here is because it's something that, oops, I think definitely stuck in mind for me, and will come up a bit later, but we'll come back to it. But I think like the aluminum material in particular was something that really resonated when I came back to Nifemi a few years ago, or a few years after this. And so really thinking about Nifemi's work and his presence in the design scene, and especially how he started becoming known in the US, was through the sort of art editions and art fairs and things that were made in, in quantities of 5. What became really interesting for me and deepened my knowledge of his practice was understanding that he had this he had this industrial design training and all of this technical knowledge of manufacturing and how to do those materials. And so I think it's actually pretty rare to know somebody who can do both of those things really masterfully and doesn't need to choose between them, but can actually incorporate elements of one or the other, very intentionally. And that was underscored by, this was a project Nifemi did years ago, but this was in Paola Antonelli's show called Pirouettes at MoMA that was up last year, and it was pirouettes, turning points in design, and she included a super wide variety of objects, everything from like the flat bottom paper bag that was invented in the 19th century by a woman, to this amazing solution that Nifemi had done. And so what you're really looking at here is like this, and you can speak to it more if you would like, since it is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I'll
Please
talk
do.
briefly about it. So it's a hand washing station that I designed during COVID, and the idea was to create like a modular solution where the parts can be there. It's basically a kit of parts, and for affordability, you can actually replace the parts quite easily. So if the sink broke, you basically just slide it off and then get a new sink. And the typology was actually informed by an anonymously designed object called Merua that's used across West Africa to transport water in kegs. So that's why that's why it's like sort of designed this way. Yeah.
Yeah. So to have some understanding of your work and then see this piece in MoMA, I think it just really underscored the fact that you kind of understand every aspect of design and made me respect you all the much more. With that, we have actually brought Nifemi into the fold for Herman Miller, and he is working on a product with us that we're really, a collection actually, not just one product. Yeah. And
So exciting.
we're obviously not going to show you what that looks like exactly.
Secret.
But what I can say about it is that I think, in terms of working with designers, what you hope to get out of it is that you are bringing their perspective and their point of view on the world to whatever they're designing that's really essential. Otherwise, the point is moot. But again, it's this connection point around the shared values. And I think, for Herman Miller, there should be a sense of ingenuity, economy in some sense, and tactility is critical. And then in this case, with your second series and the focus on aluminum, aluminum is a major factor in the material palette of Herman Miller. Cast aluminum bases for all of the Eames chairs. I mean, this is just something that we work with constantly, and to think about how that material can be reframed in a totally different light and a different form is really exciting. So I think that we're all really pumped about that.
It's been exciting, seriously. Okay. Dream come true.
Yeah, cool. And one last thing, because I've taken too long as it is, but we had Nifemi come to Michigan in April after Salone, and he took part in a video series that we're doing for the archives that I've started called Works Cited, in which we're having designers come in and spend some time with the objects in the archives and then pull out 4 things that are resonant to them in some way, that are meaningful to their practice or their history or understanding of design. And it's really fun because it is totally dependent on the designer, and it's a format that can be different depending on who comes. It's sort of limitless in that regard.
That's such a great idea.
I honestly, I totally ripped it from Criterion Collection's film closet.
It's okay. You can take credit. That's a wonderful idea.
But yes, we're very excited. It's a lot of fun. And so here's some stills. That video is probably going to be out in the next, and we have one more before yours is out. We've already released 2, one with Keiji Takuchi and one with Sina Sorab. The next one is Sina Aus and then Nifemi's. So stay tuned. I mean, it's through Miller Knoll, but you'll see it online anyway. But it was a lot of fun to have Nifemi at Miller Knoll and hear a little bit more about what was really interesting to you from that. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you
That's it.
so much. Okay. We are going to pass to Alexandra.
Hi, everyone. All right, I'm on. That's my name, Alexandra Cunningham Cameron. And it occurred to me as both of you were speaking why we were all up here together, not just because we have an affinity for each other's work and enjoy each other's company. We've been having way too much fun off stage, talking about design and debating and meeting new people and touring the artist studios, but also that we have taken maybe unexpected paths in our work and have found ways to maybe satiate our curiosity, even if it involves some risk-taking, and moved within industries, even within a larger design industry. And the same is true for me. I often start all of my projects and my work with text because my background is not in design or art history, but in literature. I studied English and continued to study English because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. But words really animate my brain and give me a starting point for having new ideas that now for the last 20 years have materialized in the built environment in some ways or another. And this particular quote, "One must be receptive to the images that material objects offer," is maybe sort of simple and direct, but I think plays into something that we'll be discussing more when we begin to answer some questions that we've posed to each other, which is like, what is the context of design? What does a material mean? What is significant about where it's made? What are the networks that it's implicit within? And as a curator of contemporary design, that's something that is sometimes even more interesting to me than the object itself. My background from, this sort of place of studying literature, thinking about how I wanted to have more of an impact on the world, led me to begin working with Design Miami, which Nifemi mentioned before, a fair that in the beginning days was a commercial marketplace that was interested in building connoisseurship and understanding of 20th and 21st century design, but it also kind of operated like a biennial in the sense that we were inviting designers to do special projects. We had a really robust program of talks. And I learned about design in a self-taught way, mostly from design dealers all over the world who were digging in people's attics and finding important works before they went to the dumpster, and from designers themselves and design studios, other museum curators, arts workers. So I really, through this fair, which was a platform, was able to have access to so many different design minds, and through them really created what I guess I humbly think of now as a practice. I guess I'm old enough and have worked long enough to call it that, although it is quite circuitous. So sort of starting in the market, then leading to an institutional job, working in various sort of publishing projects, and now working an artist foundation. I thought it might be interesting to show you a couple of projects that maybe get more towards the type of work that I do as a non-traditional curator who has followed various paths and walked through doors as they open for me, luckily. So this is an early project that I really love, which started out as a commission actually for Airbnb, where Airbnb was interested in having conversations with contemporary designers, and we did a series of installations at Design Miami mostly that talked about how people lived in their homes. And we went to this husband and wife, incredible duo, Muller Van Severen, who are based in Belgium, and said, okay, we want to do a project that brings together how you live, but it's in Miami, and how do we talk about how objects tell stories? And they came up with this tremendous idea of transporting their living room to Miami. And as though that weren't enough, and they said, and we want to do a directional sound project where all of the objects, once you approach them, begin to whisper stories to you. And they worked with this incredible writer who spoke to the family, interviewed everyone, and then wrote these kind of little fanciful narratives from each object. And it was fascinating. I mean, this is in a tent in Miami. People would approach, for example, the aluminum dining table, which was designed by the designer Hannes Van Severen, Martin Van Severen. And, it's a family dining table. It carries this sort of design legacy that's part of the family. And you would approach it, and it would talk about, who left a wine ring on the aluminum surface. And this was such an incredible way for people to break the ice around, these important objects that carry so much weight that are installed, in an environment like this that feels like fancy and pressured. And it's one of my favorite projects of all time.
And can I ask you quickly too, is fiction part of your background and that kind of storytelling?
I'm not a fiction writer. I was married to a poet, first husband. And was really part of a literary community. One of my best friends, a fiction writer, very close to actors. So, and also as someone who has ended up working in archives, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and thinking about filling in the blanks of design history, you're forced in a way to fill in the blanks in a responsible way, but that also animates stories. And what Saidiya Hartman calls critical fabulation. There are many, many sort of strategies around looking at the canon, thinking about expanding it, and also, right, truth is subjective. You can come at me later if you have some questions about that. We can discuss it. But this is my literary theory background. You know, truth is important and fundamental, but also every single person in this room would tell a different story about what happened up on the stage today. And I think that's really a fascinating way to approach life and to approach objects and design. This is a project that we commissioned from Judith Sang in 2016. And at the time, the conversation in design schools and in the Western European design community was really about manufacturing and thinking about taking the creation of objects outside of industry. And how can you do that in a fun and process-driven way that builds community? And so Judith started by inviting a bunch of friends over for dinner, and everyone had to make the stools and the table before they all ate together. And at the end of it, they had stools and table. And for this was part of an ongoing series that she was doing called Acting Things. She was collaborating with choreographer and dancers to use a choreography to mold vessels. And so this is just a shot. This is in a giant hall in Basel in the Messeplatz. There was a big stage with this kind of, really strange minimal factory, and the dancers were taking these lumps of clay and using their body to mold them and shape them as a means of talking about different means of production outside of industry. After I had been working at Design Miami for some time, I developed an independent sort of curatorial practice. I realized that I really love to work with artists and designers and to help facilitate storytelling in exhibitions. And I was curious about regional institutions around the United States who had really wonderful local art programs, but didn't have a design program, didn't have a design curator on staff. And this is an exhibition that I curated at the Museum of Contemporary Art Tucson. It's part of a collaboration between Terrell Dew Johnson, who was a Tohono O'odham basket weaver, and Aranda Lash, who are architects who are now based in between Tucson and New York. And they began talking around the subject of algorithms and how computer-generated algorithms have a relationship to the coiling involved in traditional basket weaving, and how you could start, from basket scale and expand that into architecture. And so this exhibition consisted of a variety of prototypes that we had hoped would turn into a seed bank project for the O'odham Reservation in Sells, Arizona, and is still an ongoing dialogue. I've ended up collaborating with them for about 12, 15 years now, thinking about how to create spaces to talk about the work that they're doing, sort of thinking about computer-generated design and handcraft, and what that sort of cultural conversation can mean. And a few other exhibitions. I was consulting, doing a bunch of different things, editing an arts journal called the Miami Rail, and had said, I will never work for a museum. Museums are too heavy and too slow. I like to do 10 things at once. And as soon as you say you're never going to do something, you end up doing it. And I became the inaugural curator of contemporary design Hint Secretarial Scholar at Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. So not only did I begin working for a museum, but really like a capital I institution, and learned so much. Thinking about how to build a program around contemporary design while also sort of filling in not the blanks, but filling in the collection with important works that I think get to where we are today, talking about contemporary design like Nifemi's and these sort of creative practices that are in between artistic disciplines. And I did not curate the show in 1976. I was not born yet. But it's a show that I come back to over and over again. And maybe something that curators don't talk about enough is how obsessed we are with other exhibitions that inform our work. And this is the inaugural exhibition of Cooper Hewitt. So when the museum was established, it was established with the study collection of the Cooper Union School. And the Cooper Union study collection had been organized by many New Yorkers and the Hewitt sisters to create a starting point for building a national heritage and design language for the students of the Cooper Union School, women, working class people, immigrants to the United States who are interested in learning a trade and craft and decorative arts and design. And that collection eventually became so big and successful that the school needed to disband it. And many influential people rallied to get, this is the abbreviated version, rallied together to found the National Design Museum. So we have been, up until recently, some new Smithsonian museums are being formed now, the sort of youngest Smithsonian based in New York. And at the time, in the 70s, this was sort of after MoMA's incredible new domestic landscape show, many good design shows. The director and the chief curator at the time of Cooper Hewitt, this new museum, said, actually, we want to do something a little bit different when we're talking about design. We don't want to tell people what good design is, but we want to tease out all of these different ways of making design that are part of everyday life. And so she commissioned the architect Hans Hollein to lead this large-scale series of experiential installations within the former Carnegie Mansion, which was donated to the Smithsonian as a new home of Cooper Hewitt. And these are some examples of how the different architects and designers who made these installations for the exhibition began talking about how we are all designers and design isn't necessarily just a professionalized discipline. And one of my favorites is this installation of breads from around the world, where you can see all of the different shapes and folding and textures of bread design, and it's so moving because you have this almost like universal material that is translated through so many different hands around the world, and I love that, and that has sort of shaped Cooper Hewitt as an institution from the beginning, thinking about design experience, not just showing objects, but being really bold and thinking about creating environments for exhibitions, working with designers and architects to create really unusual spaces and to challenge the way people think or connect with the way people think about design. And that really inspired all of my exhibitions at the museum. I worked at Cooper Hewitt for 9 years, and I'm still engaged with the museum as a curator at large. But my first show there was focused on the designer Willie Smith, who was a fashion designer who died in the late 80s of HIV/AIDS, but was an incredibly influential designer in terms of thinking about how to make fashion accessible. And not only was he making this ultra wearable clothing that was intended to go day into night, to be flexible, to be affordable, to be gender neutral in some cases, he was also collaborating with some of the most interesting artists at the time, Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane, Keith Haring, Les Levine, the architect James Wines, and Sight, who designed his showrooms, which were supposed to be places of radical transformation. And at the moment, you were getting that kind of like big concept from very, very expensive and elite fashion houses. And American design also was really not a powerhouse on the global fashion stage. And Willie Smith really changed that. One of his first runway shows was included a Namjoon Paik commission. So this is like really incredible stuff. He had an installation at PS1 in 1982. And so you get a sense, you can see the Carnegie Mansion in the background, how we endeavored to recreate with James Wines, who was 90 at the time, the original Willy Ware showrooms. It's an image by Andreas Sturzing on the left, and then sort of how we were able within our own curatorial and conservation limits, with touch distance of these incredible objects, drawings lent by the Albanelli Archive, costumes for dance performances, to try to make to give a sense of what it was like to be in that world for anyone who wasn't around. And something that we did to really think about how we have community participation in building ideas for exhibitions was we made a digital community archive. We had a really hard time finding Willy Ware garments, and so we opened up the conversation to anyone who wanted to donate clothing to the exhibition or tell stories about how they knew Willy or went to one of the shows or bought one of his shirts at a mall in Iowa, and it made them feel like they were part of an exciting community of artists and free thinkers.
Well, that's a wonderful way also to think about how artists and designers can continue to create community even after they're gone, and through your efforts. But also, it's really interesting to hear that there was so much participation.
There was a lot of participation, and although this was actually one of the first times where I really understood how memory works very differently. It was the first time that I had organized an exhibition around someone who is no longer living, and then through the memories of his friends and his family, and also people who didn't know him but were moved by him, we built this narrative. And this is actually can we make it play? Okay, it's online, and you can still search through it, and it's a website that was created by this wonderful design studio called Linked by Air, and we made it at a time also when people were really, during the pandemic, people were thinking about creating new digital experiences for exhibitions online. And so rather than kind of like a linear walkthrough of the show, it's this strange, intuitive experience where different suggestions pop up. You can go through fashion, or you can, look through the biographies of the different people who contributed, or you can look at the video, because at the end of his life, he was interested in making film. Anyway, but it's an example of how, and now I can't move forward, but how exhibitions really are projects that almost have 365 degrees of touch points, right? We think about the physical gallery space, but there are also books and publications, there are live programs, there's a digital element, there's potentially film, there are community activations. There are so many different ways to bring people in to talk about the work of a designer, artist, or a theme through the museum, right? It really isn't just a static space. And the last show that I curated at the museum was a triennial. Cooper Hewitt does design triennials. This is called Making Home, Smithsonian Design Triennial. And I co-curated it with two other curators, another Smithsonian curator, Michelle Wilkinson from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. She's a curator of architecture and design there, and also Christina De Leon, who is a curator of Latino design at Cooper Hewitt. And we invited 25 practices to occupy all of the rooms of the Carnegie Mansion. So we did a full museum takeover, which had not been done since the early days of the museum, also linking back to Man Transforms, which would probably have another title today, right? But we love it still. And we, through these 25 practices across the US territories and tribal nations, presented different aspects of how designers are thinking about home. And the image you see here is part of an installation that several Puerto Rican artists organized that looked at the Smithsonian's role in acquiring Puerto Rican cultural heritage after the Spanish-American War, when Puerto Rico became a territory of the United States, and how many of these incredible objects, Taino artifacts, are living in Smithsonian storage, and how they are still connected to different sites of the island, the archipelago, and alive and part of contemporary design culture. So this is an example of certain things that are in the archive, and then some examples below of the different typological display. Yeah, I'm not working anymore. I'm still engaged with the museum, working on an exhibition on the designer Tobias Wang, who died suddenly when he was quite young, around 35 in 2010. He was someone who we would think of as a critical designer, meaning that he was making design about design, which means design about society and the way we engage with the material realm. He was looking at subjects like gun violence, luxury consumption, health and wellness, vice, taboo, and he often was interested in retail spaces as spaces of equity where people could come together and, touch and experience and also learn about design. This is an image of him sitting in a vitrine. You can see his hand is sort of dipped in gold as a comment on, the designer also being an object that's put on display. And through Tobias Wang and throughout my life cycle in the museum, we've pulled together a series of acquisitions that are thinking about kind of like a trajectory of contemporary design. I went into the museum thinking that I would only acquire very recent work by designers, and then sort of immediately was drawn to building more of a history of contemporary design from the 70s to now, and trying to bring certain works into the collection that I think are helping us understand why designers are working in the way they're working. So one is a part of the larger Tobias Wang archive that we acquired of more than 50 works, a screen cover from 2002 that was cut from a Pleats Please garment. We remember when we all had screen covers and desktop computers for an early Apple desktop. Niki de Saint-Phal, one of the, if not the first, chair that she designed in 1979 as she was beginning to move into a practice that was looking more at function, use, design, architecture, even product design as a means of finding more access points to connecting with people and also funding some of her larger architectural projects. This is hot off the presses. I don't know if we just had the acquisition meeting, so it's just been formalized and not announced. A very early work by Pippa Garner, who's a trans woman artist who just recently passed away. Think Man is a cabinet that she made in 1984 when she was living in the Los Alamos apartments. It's actually a mashup of several works that she had to recreate because she did not have adequate storage space to store previous works. Is an issue for all artists. How do you preserve your work? Do you need to make it new when you don't have institution collecting it or a gallery to store it or your own storage space?
It's the part we don't like to think about.
It's the part we don't like to think about, an interesting element. And this was made when Pippa still identified as Philip and was beginning the process of transitioning. And you can see it's sort of a gentleman suit jacket that has this sort of peekaboo quality. And at the time, she was very interested in codes of masculinity and the expressions of them. And this was a work that was hanging in a closet. And there are many different iterations of Pippa's use of this suit jacket and the sort of corporate male uniform, and an incredible work, Jae Jung Oh, which is sort of a portrait of of the designer who is a graduate from Cranbrook, and this was her graduation project that has continued in many formations, where she collects objects that have been thrown away. Now people leave them at her door in her neighborhood, and she pulls them together into a portrait of the moment, and then wraps them in rawhide, where they, it's difficult to tell in the photograph, but you can begin to make out some of the different objects that she's pulled together and the texture. And although this was the first work that she made out of the pandemic, so it collects many of the objects from this sort of unusual period of time when we weren't interacting with each other. So it's monumental from that point of view, but it also went directly into the museum's collection and was a commission from her. So we had a lot of conversations about the texture of it and how, because it will go into this kind of time lock space in museum storage, what it means that you won't be able to see, sort of the oils of people's fingers touching it or sitting it, and, the life that a piece of furniture leads. And then just quickly, a project that came out last month, for the 20th anniversary of Pinup Magazine, an architecture and design magazine that all of us have been involved with in one way or the other over time. It's really formational to the careers of many designers and architects. The editor of Pinup asked me to put together a list of 40 objects that represent the 21st century, and it was very difficult to do. But you get a sense here of the sort of everyday objects and then really complex intellectual experiments that I thought would somehow represent the transitional moment that we're going through as society is changing, shifting. We're understanding the new ways that artificial intelligence and computer-generated systems are influencing our lives. We're more exposed to each other's ideas than ever before. How does that impact the work of designers, this cross-cultural exchange? This is just a segment, everything from a BlackBerry and a fidget spinner and a crock to, a cow bench by Julia Lohmann, which was created to remind people that meat comes from animals, and a bone chair by Joris Larman that looks at how biomimicry and human bone structures can also create architectural and engineering stability. And now I'm at the Judd Foundation, which is very new. Only for the last couple of months, I'll be looking at Judd's design archive, his design legacy, thinking about how to interpret it today. As you know, he was an incredible designer and architect, and also working with Donald Judd Furniture, which is a furniture company that he established to sell the furniture in perpetuity and support the foundation. Currently at Spring Street, we have an exhibition up called Donald Judd Furniture Wood and Metal, which includes a series of sets that Flavin Judd, who's the artistic director of Judd Foundation, brought together for a program that was organized by Untapped Journal. It's a design journal. And the idea was to bring together an interesting mix of people, chefs, fashion designers, a skateboarder, to respond to the furniture in real time and to think about what a piece of furniture means. So it was an incredible program with, everyone sort of sitting on the floor and listening to these really wonderful and sometimes irreverent thinkers talking about the furniture and responding to questions. And is on view through the summer until August 1st if you're in New York and you'd like to come by.
Yeah, be sure to check it out. Thank you so much, Alexandra. So before we move to questions from the audience, I want to pose a question to the three of you. And what I'd like to ask is kind of the big question of do we need to define design and art as separate pursuits, or is that a false equivalency? So I'll just pose it to the group and let you all kind of, I know that was one of the questions that we were thinking about as an overarching kind of thought that we were all kind of thinking about, so.
I don't know about shall I jump in to this
Yeah, yeah.
really, really
Please jump in.
prickly question? I don't know for me if it's about definition, but more about how I think of the differences between art and design. I think about design as something that has an ethic, in that it has a purpose, in that it is trying to participate in the world in a really specific way. It is offering something, it's responsible for something, it's trying to engage with a user or a material or an idea, it's moving towards form within a system, it's responsible. And although there is obvious art in design, I don't think of art as having any of those obligations. I think it's important to insist that there is a free space to experiment and create transcendence without any of these responsibilities to society.
Great answer. Nifemi, do you have any thoughts to add? That was incredible. Thank you.
I think, I think for me sometimes, and especially with the work that I do, it's usually the audience that dictates. Because, for example, I would design a bench and you would expect people to either place objects or sit on it, but then it's like, okay, you know what? I just want it in the corner, and they treat it more as an art object. So I'm in a lot of, to be honest, right now, in my practice, I try not to blur the lines. I let people dictate. And I'm learning that through just watching people engage with the work that I put out. Yeah.
Well, how do you define yourself?
Oof.
Because that's a tough one, right? And maybe you alternate. Maybe it's not one or the other.
I mean, you know, to be honest with you, I do have I really wanted to be an artist rather than a designer. I just didn't know, because I studied history of art before design. And for me, growing up in Lagos, in Nigeria, I remember interacting with objects, and there was no line between what the objects were. So you would see, like, maybe a Sunufu stool from, like, Western Africa, and my mom would be like, yo, you can't sit on that stool because it's precious. And it's like, but you're supposed to sit on that stool.
Right.
Because that's the function of it. But I think for me, maybe I take that onto my practice as well, with some of the objects that I create, even though I also design with functionality in mind because of my industrial design background. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's an element to this functionality piece, that design is always in conversation or response to human needs or operation, in the sense that even a chair form that is designed as like something that is to repel someone to not sit on is still a response to a human body and how they sit. And so that is, I'm sure that there are exceptions to be made, but I think that one could think about design in that way. And whether that is how you're thinking about the process of it, you know, I think there's a correlation there. In terms of industrial design, you can get even more narrow in your definition, and that, like, you know, design is meant to solve a problem. But I think that's not really what we're talking about, because it is those areas that are a little bit more blurred, because you're thinking about like something that is an addition of one, that is, you know, a bench that is more sculpture. So where does that fit? I mean, I don't know that it needs definition necessarily.
Yeah, but I think for me, to be honest, with the artistic side of the practice, it was more to like, it acts more as an investigation. So which is why I'm not sure if it's like, oh, design, but it's acting more of an investigation and then acts as inspiration for objects that I might need to mass produce.
Yeah.
Which is why, for example, like Herman Miller reaching out and saying, okay, we love your artistic practice, and we're engaging around that, but then as we're designing, I'm thinking about mass production, but leaning on those objects for like form, and also leaning on some of the answers I've gotten from my investigation.
Yeah.
If not, yeah.
And I think in terms of material investigation, I mean, whether you're calling that design or art, I mean, who cares really? I mean, if something is compelling you to look into it and explore and discover and process and mess up and figure out something else, I mean, what is that but inquiry? I mean, that's inquiry.
I know,
I mean,
but just to say, because I'll take the position of defending design right here, I think that we have this conversation when there's a certain value for the work and the hierarchy starts to lock in, right? Where it's like, okay, well, this is extra special and we took a lot of time with it and valuable, so we're going to call it art. Whereas actually making design, especially on the industrial side, is so tremendously complicated, and the amount of people who are involved in making it, like I wish that we were able to think about design with the same sort of reverence, and this is a complicated thing to say, that we think about art.
I don't know if we want to get into the market economics here, but yes, I think there's a point to be made there, because, no, but truly, I mean, even if you compare design to fashion, there is a luxury tier that exists in the world where people almost don't blink at hearing that a luxury handbag costs what it does, which is, I don't know, I'm not $5,000, $6,000, but to hear that, a new sofa costs 10, to some people that feels, I mean, this is generalizing, but that can feel like it's at a certain tier. But in reality, a sofa is something that you sit on every single day. It's one of the most used items in your house. And I have just noticed, like, being in the industry from, the side of like literally a furniture manufacturer, that there is often, back to this idea of responsibility, there's this responsibility to explain a price point and why it costs what it does, and it is there. I mean, as there's so much attention and care and time and development and engineering and so many different people put into it, but it is interesting, these market economics and some of that marketing, where there are some things that like never need explanation for why this handbag costs what it does, versus needing to explain literally every seam and every type of stuffing that would go into why a sofa costs what it does. It is interesting.
That is an interesting kind of distinction.
Well, it comes back to the subject of identity, right?
Identity.
Because a handbag is something that we've been programmed to identify as part of our identity, an expression of our identity. We take it with us. It says something about who we are, what our aesthetic interests are, maybe what's in our bank account, etc. And the sofa doesn't hold that same sort of personal weight, right? Arbitrarily, maybe. It should.
I'm going to actually open it up for questions, because I see people raising hands, and I want to have a chance for the audience to pose their own questions. So go ahead, Benjamin.
Mini question. It gets into this question of kind of like privacy versus performance, I think. When you're talking about the sofa, and a very different decision about a sofa, for example, is made. Thank you. It's quick. A very different example. What I was saying was that it kind of gets at this idea of like privacy versus performance with the handbag versus the sofa analogy, and this idea that the sofa that you might purchase for yourself potentially becomes a really different thing if you imagine that like your home will be documented at some point, versus a private person who doesn't imagine that for themselves or hope for that for themselves. Is that kind of part of the argument that you made, the like privacy versus public of the handbag metaphor specifically? I think like people that collect work of course, we have the like special occasions where people collect work and they keep it quite private, but I think a lot of people collect work with that kind of like performance in mind. And I think I've never thought about it in those terms. So I think it's quite provocative what you're saying about the handbag specifically, that this thing that somehow becomes connected to your body, we're able to place more kind of like fiscal value or invest more potentially fiscally in it than the chair that might like sit privately in our home and not perform in any way other than for ourselves. Not a question, just a.
That's excellent. Yeah. Any other questions in the audience? Rona?
You know, thinking about design and art, I want to throw craft in there. I think they can't hear you. Okay, sorry. When you think about art and design and how to distinguish them, when we throw the term craft in there and makers, you know, just your thoughts in the current environment, how those all play together and how they're seen.
I think they play together well. You know, like there are all part. There's craft in every single object in this room, and there's craft in art, as there's design in art. Just to continually undermine every single argument we're making, which is why this is such a difficult discussion to have, and there's never any sort of resolution at the end. But I think what you might be gesturing to is a further hierarchy that maybe began to be established, at least in the United States, around 20 years ago, when we saw things like the Museum of American Craft changing their name to the Museum of Arts and Design, and craft becoming almost like a dirty word that didn't carry the same weight or value as design.
Right, and now there's sort of a
There's a shift, right?
yes, there is. There is a shift. It's kind of coming back, but again, there's a bit of a tone there, because a lot of the coverage is sort of talking about craft in these terms of like, oh, but actually, you know, which is also really annoying. I would sort of put craft, not ranking it, but I think craft, I think of it more as a process and a practice. Obviously, there are complete outputs to that process and that practice many, many times, right? But I think that's really how I think of it. And it is so broad for that reason. Whereas usually, you know, obviously there are blurred lines with like design and additions and all of these things, but you know, typically with design, I think Alexandra gave a really good definition. Like there is a responsibility, there's a brief, there's a problem to solve, there's a person that you're designing for, there's like a point in mind. Art's a little more open-ended, but I think craft plays with all of those because it is that process and that practice. And that's a beautiful thing. It needs no ranking, no hierarchy, in my opinion.
Nifemi, do you want to add to that before we wrap up?
You know, more than ever, so I was on the jury, I think last year, was it last year or this year? On the Louis V. Craft Prize. And there were loads of craftspeople having conversations about, you know, lack of opportunities, lack of engagement, what I would say, with their work. And I think one of the beautiful things that we also were talking about yesterday that I think the fashion industry does is that it blurs the line and then introduces everyone into whatever it is that they're doing, and then the output is kind of commercial. So I think now, more than ever, people are craving tactility, and that's why craft, especially with the digital age, and with the reintroduction of craft, it's going to take another shift that I'm excited about, but also scared for, where it's like, the digital world will have to interact with it. A lot of craftspeople now, of course, they start and end with their hands, but within that process, there's also digital aid through CAD, through sometimes rendering, etc. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to take a shift that we might have to embrace.
And we were talking about this yesterday when we were touring at Anderson Rant in the workshops, and how it's so interesting to see here how these two modes are really blended in how people are approaching the workshops and what material practices they're investigating. And I do think that is certainly the present and the future.
And maybe with craft, which to me is centered around a material expertise, right? Whereas, designers who maybe have a different type of design training are exploring around so many different ways of making, and in the studio, with industry, with different materials, with different shapes and forms. As Kelsey was saying, with the process of craft, there really is most often a dedication to a material. And you work with that material, clay, wood, straw, for your whole life. And in that thinking about the material, the different ways of working with it, whether it's through digital technologies or through a different type of kiln, or through a new way of, integrating other materials to create different shapes, like it makes this idea of technology less scary, I think, because you understand it as a tool, like something that is additive. And at the core is still that whatever that connection is, with this natural material that comes from the earth, it comes from the environment around us, and how we, as human brains can create ingenuity, inventiveness, in the most beautiful sort of collaboration between human and nature, in my opinion.
Well, that was really beautiful. I think on that note, I want to thank you. Is there another question?
Yeah, there's one question.
Okay, absolutely. Let's take some more questions then. Lindsay, we'll start there, and then we'll go to you.
Hello, I want to just thank the panel because it's been such a delight to receive such sophisticated and accessible language around design. And the question I had is whether you thought that the critical writing in the design world reached the quality and the frequency that you hope for to sort of serve the discipline.
We love this question. I don't know if you heard that, but there was the ooze.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm gonna plug in Jasper Morris's new book that's been published by Apartamento, and I think in that book it talks around. I mean, it's mostly Jasper's writing before he actually engages with work, and I think it's interesting because I think now more than ever designers have to think about policy. They have to think about policy integration. And they also have to think of, I would say, sustainability is a buzzword that I feel like every designer should obviously think about. But when it comes to, I would say material migration. So material migration is something that people really, in my own opinion, should really engage with from a critical standpoint. So yeah, I can go on about this all day, so I know we don't have that much time, but yeah.
I mean, as someone who has written in this sector and edited many critics and still friends with a lot of them, and sort of observing what's happened in the media world since I haven't been as much of an active, participant, I would say I think it's very disappointing. It's letting most of us down, but I think that the failure of criticism is not just confined to design. It's happening in so many places in society. I think there are some interesting sort of flashes, though. For example, the Pulitzer Prize in Criticism for the last 2 years running has been awarded to architecture critics, which is unprecedented. I mean, that is amazing. At the same time, there is only one newspaper in the country that still employs a full-time architecture critic. That's the Dallas Morning News. Mark Lamster is the one who won the Pulitzer this year. And I think one thing that we were talking about is there are lots of people who have incredibly well-formed opinions that have, or interesting provocations or things to put out into the world for dissemination and debate, but because of the current media landscape or lack of risk, I mean, there's a lot of factors here, but seemingly there aren't that many places to publish them. I think that's why you see a lot of people going to these alternative media channels, at least in other topics, design a little bit. I mean, there are a lot of design Substacks, for example. You're not really seeing pundits on design so much on YouTube or podcasts, but you know.
I think it's starting. Like we unfortunately or fortunately have to look for design criticism in new places because it's not happening through traditional media in the way that it used to, where you were a critic, you got paid a living wage, you didn't have to navigate the interest of advertisers or brands. And so we're seeing, comedians doing design criticism on Instagram. We are. Yeah, Dan Rosen, check him out. Who is a starting point for allowing people to present a point of view that maybe isn't complementary on really mainstream, agreed upon aesthetics and ways of living. And even though I think that's a start of a conversation, right, and not like a fully formed piece of criticism, I think that we've found an interesting way to open up a dialogue, which has been important because the design world really globally continues to be quite small. At least, it's a really tricky thing to say, but there is this sort of design community that feeds into itself and for many years has tried to be supportive of design because of the need to build awareness and interest and value for design so that designers, can continue to be hired by companies like Miller Knoll to make furniture for the brands, to be represented by galleries, to find all different platforms, to have studio space, to make new things. People need to understand the value. So saying something is not good has been a little bit of treacherous territory, when you're trying to build. But I think that's shifting.
Yeah, I'm also going to add that it's funny because the book, there's a book signing after. I feel like I'm plugging the book. But
Plug the
I'm
book.
actually-
Plug the
but
book.
it's funny. But it's funny because every contributor, I actually approached them, all the museums that acquired the work, and I asked them, I was like, please write the why. Write the reason why you've actually put these works into your permanent collection. So a lot of that is actually critical dialogue, because we ended up having really strong conversations and investigation around my work, and them either justifying or breaking down the idea oh, that makes sense, or that doesn't make sense. Please tell me more about that, or maybe you should explore more of this aspect of your work. So all of that is kind of communicating, which I think was important to me because I feel like if it resonates with someone, I want to understand why.
Yeah.
Even as a design, yeah.
And one additional thing, as Alexandra noted, the design world, industry, community is quite small. And as such, it sort of protected itself by operating a bit at a remove. And part of the inaccessible language, is a protective device in a way. So I would say that plain and simple language is transgressive in its way, whether you're looking at Dan Rosen making jokes on the internet, which are extraordinarily on point for the most part, or Jasper Morrison's, treatise that is in incredibly plain and simple language. So for a designer of his caliber to be able to speak so simply to something, all of those, to be able to communicate in such a simple and straightforward manner about design, which has kind of insulated itself through through some of these language barriers in a sense is very interesting, I think.
We've got 2 questions. Oh, someone.
Hi, this is for Nifemi. That bench you made out of aluminum that's flat with the bowl and that's in 5 museums, and now you're going to be doing a collaboration with Knoll. Since that was made from a mold in Nigeria, are you going to just replicate that mold with more modern materials and then making that more mass-producing does that make you feel terrible about it or less, less precious? I wonder about that with all designers, really.
It's funny. I won't get into it because I feel like I'll give too much away of the collection that's coming out. But it's a question that we actually posed during one of the first design sessions, because I didn't want it to lose its soul or kind of cheapen it to mass production. And I think Herman Miller has a history of actually doing it the right way, because if you notice, Herman Miller always collaborates with artists. And they figure out a way to, I mean, look at Noguchi, for example, how to still keep a soul into mass production and make sure that it doesn't water down the original idea. And these are conversations that we have on a regular basis. But I can't say too much because I'll give too much away. And
It's
Kelsey's
not,
warned
it's not
me.
exactly, it's not a carbon copy.
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
not.
like a printed, same thing.
That's great, thank you. We have a couple more questions. I think what we're gonna do is have you come up and ask us, and we're gonna thank the panel for such an amazing presentation. Please stick around if you are interested in the book. We'll be doing a book signing. Give us a few minutes. We have a couple more questions in the audience. Feel free to come up, and thank you so much for attending the Critical Dialogue today.